All right. Very quickly, we're going to go through three modes of selection, three ways in which natural selection has been observed to affect how frequently traits show up in the population. There's three modes of selection that we will discuss. Okay, stabilizing. Aw, dang it. Gotta get my pen. Sorry. Stabilizing, directional, and diversifying. Okay? Stabilizing selection basically means you've got two extremes. Maybe you've got very, very light fur color and very, very dark fur color. And what natural selection is going to do, if this is representing the number of individuals you have, it's going to squeeze out the extremes and focus the number of organisms to be most commonly somewhere in the middle. So the greatest number would definitely start to peak somewhere intensely in the middle. We're going to start to eliminate anything that's out to the either extreme. A great example of this is human birth weight. Human birth weight, we think in pounds, not kilograms, but human birth weight is typically, what, I don't know, somewhere around 6, 7, 8 pounds or so. So let's say 7 pounds. Usually we don't see 1 pound babies, and usually, mercifully, we don't see 15-pound babies. Okay? Why? Because this is very dangerous for the baby, this is very dangerous for the mother. Natural selection acts against this. Babies that are this weight usually don't survive. Babies that are this weight may not survive, or certainly they wouldn't have used to, because the mother wouldn't survive childbirth well. Natural selection pressure is for this birth weight child. It's going to eliminate the extremes. Okay? So that is an example of stabilizing. We're going to shoot to the middle. Okay? Now, directional selection is a little bit different. Directional selection is when we're going to press for one side of the curve. So if this was my original curve with the light color and the dark color extremes, I'm going to get the curve to move over time towards the dark, and it's going to peak out over in this direction over time. So the peak shifts in one direction or the other. So it generally favors perhaps initially rare individuals that are deviating from average. It occurs when the environment is changing. Maybe this middle ground had been favored for a long time in the stable environment, but maybe the environment is changing. During glacial periods, as it got colder, the size of black bears in Europe increased. Why? Because they could retain body heat better. They survived those long cold periods better, and so over time larger bears came to exist because they survived better. Okay? Now, diversifying selection is kind of strange. You need to think of this, you need to think of a patchy situation where maybe there's habitat that is dark, but then there's spots of habitat that are light and dark and light and things like that. It's a patchwork, okay, with patches of dark and light. So Maybe in these dark patches you see little dark rodents scurrying around, and in these light patches the same rodent with a lighter phenotype would survive, but there's really no good environment for an organism that is somewhere in between. He gets eaten up in both of those environments. That's diversifying selection, where the extremes here and here, for example, are favored over some intermediate form, and what you get is this double peak in the curve. If this is again number of individuals, you'd have lots that are perhaps very light and lots that are perhaps very dark, but very few that survive that are something in between because there's no environment for them. It can result in something called balanced polymorphism, where the environment actually supports more than one morph. So there's many forms of a particular species in that environment. So associate diversifying selection with that word patchy. A patchy environment would tend to lead to diversifying selection. Okay? Here's a good example of that. In a particular finch population, there are either large-beaked birds or small-beaked. There aren't any intermediates. The intermediate size is not efficient at cracking the big seeds or is efficient at cracking the little seeds, which are the two types of seeds that are available in this finch's environment. So the intermediates are selected against, and so what you end up with is a graph that has lots of small beaks, lots of big beaks, and very few that have any kind of beak size in the middle. Okay? This is a great, if you have to learn one slide here, this is the slide to get. Okay? This is showing you stable, here's your range of color for a particular rodent, number of individuals, and this is the original population bell curve. Stabilizing selection, we're going to favor the intermediate. We're going to eliminate those at either extreme. Diversifying, we're going to favor each extreme and get rid of the middle. And directional, we're going to favor one extreme or the other. Okay, in this case, the dark. Okay. All right. I think that's pretty much it. This is just kind of a couple slides with big themes that I want to make sure you get before we stop. Remember that variation is the raw material for natural selection. Notice all the variation that is existing in these populations of organisms. In order for natural selection to work, there must be differences within the population like what we see here. If everyone's identical, then nobody is favored over the other by the environment. Some individuals must be more fit than others. And also, very critical, those variations must be inheritable. We've talked about this before in the very first podcast, I think, for evolution. Okay? And remember where variation comes from. The root source of any variation is mutational changes, okay? Mutations in the DNA that occur at random. But once we get those mutations, then they can be endlessly shuffled into new combinations. So that's another source of variation. Sexual recombination, and you need to know this word, recombination. That is like shuffling the alleles, shuffling the genes into new combinations. So we get new arrangements in our offspring when we sexually reproduce, and that means new phenotypes very often. When we mix those alleles, we get different results, as anyone who has siblings can know. Okay? So, please remember what fitness is in terms of Darwin as well. Fitness is not do you survive, it is do you survive and do you reproduce? Do you leave more offspring? That's what counts. Okay. I think we'll call it that. You must get your genes to the next generation. All right. I think we're done. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next podcast.